What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in, and as promised, in this video we'll be taking a look inside of episode 1 season 7 of Alone. So if you hadn't had a chance to watch episode 1 yet and you don't want any spoilers, you might want to back out of this video now and maybe even steer clear of the comments. Here's 10 seconds, go. Okay, so if you are still here, I'm gonna assume you've already seen episode 1 and you know that I made it exactly 10 days before losing my firesteel and having to throw in the towel. Okay, I wish I could have told you guys a little bit sooner, but unfortunately, you know, that's just part of the gig. If you get it, it's keeping everything on the down low. I know a lot of people was behind me and supporting me, and I really do appreciate that. And now they're probably a little bit disappointed, but trust me, nobody's more disappointed than I am. I'm not normally the kind of person that wears their emotions right on their sleeve, you know, but I was pretty gutted in the actual moment of realizing, you know, this is kind of it for me. And it's not every day that you see $1 million slip through your hands that could have done a lot of things for your family. You know, I'm just like anybody else. Even watching that back was a little bit difficult. At a point in there, I say that I'd found all the pieces to the puzzle, and to me, I did. You know, I was finding it pretty easy to take game, and I was feeding myself, and I was building the type of shelter that I wanted to build, and I was finding lots of interesting, you know, like man-made resources that I could use to my advantage. And so I was just putting my plan into motion, and I was executing, and it was working. After everything being said and done, you know, the first thing I asked myself, and a lot of you guys are probably wondering the same thing too, is, Shawn, why didn't you tether your firesteel to you, you big dummy? I can't really make any excuses for that. You know, I got comfortable and complacent. It's just something that I overlooked along the way. Something that I never really thought about. It kind of takes a lot going into this, you know, and you're kind of in a rush all the time. I mean, you have time to speak with like your like-minded friends and your castmates, and you go over a little bit of game plan, you go over a little bit of strategy, and honestly, losing your firesteel, or whether or not to tether it to you, or how to tether it to you, that honestly just never came up. So it was something that I overlooked. So the next big thing is, why not pursue that friction fire? And again, I don't make any excuses other than I hadn't took the steps beforehand to make sure I was able to make that friction fire when I needed it. But then again, I had a firesteel, so I wasn't really on the lookout for materials to, you know, make a friction fire with. It's actually kind of ironic, because in the beginning, before I ever left the house and got to the Arctic, you know, my firesteel was on the fence whether or not I was going to take it. I'm not an expert in friction fire by any means, but with the right materials and the right conditions, you know, I can bust out a coal pretty consistently. So, you know, I was thinking, if things are right when I get there, you know, maybe save an item by not taking the firesteel, and then I could take something else. Needless to say though, when I got there, and you know, a friend of mine on the show also is Keith, was able to scout around a little bit, and we found out pretty quickly that the ground was covered in this really dense moss that held a lot of water, and so everything pretty much on the ground was constantly moist, even if it hadn't rained in a couple days. And over every peak and in every valley is kind of a completely different biome. So, you know, depending on where you got placed, you may or may not have resources to work with. And of course, you know, I've never been to the Arctic before, so a lot of those timbers out there were unfamiliar to me. You know, I knew the characteristics of them, but, you know, not a whole lot of detail about any of them. There's a ton of stuff going through your mind, you know, and in this situation, finding the resources to make a friction fire with, it really needed to be a forethought as opposed to an afterthought. And you know, because when are you going to need a fire? You're going to need a fire when you get hungry. You're going to need a fire when you get cold. You're going to need a fire, you know, to kind of keep the predators off of you. And that's going to be of an evening, in the nighttime, you know, and that's kind of a little bit late to start looking for the materials you need to make a friction fire, is when you need them the most. And that's kind of how this situation ended up. There was a pretty prevalent predator presence where I was at, which that's fine, that's game and all, but you also kind of have to be realistic about it. It's not, you know, it's not a drive-through safari park, or you're not at the zoo. You know, these animals will get to you, they can get to you, and they're hungry, you know, just like everything else. One thing that the episode didn't show was on, I think it was like night 3 or 4 maybe, I did try to sleep without a fire because I had the negative 60-degree bag, and you know, the nights weren't terrible. So I thought I would try it and kind of see how that would work out for me. And at about, I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning or so, somewhere around in there, I was awoken by you know, a pack of wolves that were relatively close to me. And it wasn't, you know, it didn't completely freak me out, but it did, you know, it does get the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, where you know you need to get up and be a little more proactive than just lay there and let them come on in. So, you know, naturally you jump up and make a fire. Then what the video did show was the night that the bear come up and got in the pot or whatever. Well, that was the second time that I tried sleeping without a fire. So I went, just laid down that night, and again, you know, it was a few days had passed, so I got comfortable again, and you know, I don't really need a fire. It's not super cold yet, and I got this bag, so you know, I didn't build a fire. And I mean, as soon as I dozed off, there was something, you know, something down there meddling in my pot. So by the time it came to losing this firesteel, sleeping without a fire seemed pretty ridiculous to me. So right around in this area also is where the line between actual survival and a reality show contest gets a little bit blurred. Now don't get me wrong, Alone is very real. They really drop you off out there. You're really, you know, surviving the situation that they put you in. But with that being said, you know, a lot of people would probably argue that it's easier because actual survival, you don't have that tap out button where someone will come rescue you. That is true. But you know, you're also not geo-fenced in either. So if you didn't have the right resources in your area, you could always move to a different area, you know, kind of like the early settlers did. When there was no more game and there were no more resources, you know, they wouldn't stay there. They would just get up and move. And so I felt like I had all the resources, though. I was lucky in that aspect that I felt like I had plenty of game in my area. I felt like I had plenty of resources to build with, just not so much to make a friction fire. But then again, I wasn't really planning on making a friction fire. Either way, you know, it's a little shot to the ego. If you think about it in the aspect of, had this been 100% real situation, everything being the same, say I was out there shooting a documentary or something in the Arctic and lose a firesteel, somebody would say, you know, well, you would have died. You would have froze, you would have been eaten by predators, you wouldn't have had any way to cook, you wouldn't have any way to keep yourself warm. But I know that's not entirely true, because even if I didn't have the materials to make a friction fire with, I had camera lenses that I could have magnified the sun through, no problem. I had camera batteries I could have shorted out, made a fire, that wouldn't have been a problem. I had, you know, like I said, I was geo-fenced in. I could have went somewhere else where there were more materials. You know, and I could have still done those things. I mean, it's completely against the rules of using any of the camera equipment, but I knew in my head that, you know, there was a way out of this. So, you know, it's $1 million. Is it worth cheating for? Some people would say yes, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, I personally would rather be the guy that lost his Firesteel than the guy that cheated to try to get ahead. You know, could you have been able to keep the camera from seeing that for another 90 days? You know, who knows? Anyway, that's beside the point. You know, I made the choice that I made because that's the way that I felt like it needed to go. It's the way I wanted my story to go. I didn't want to be the guy who struggled for days or was constantly under the pressure of the predators because he didn't have a fire, and I didn't want that to overshadow all the good things that I did do. So all in all, this was a great experience. It's definitely not something I'm going to beat myself up about when so much good came from it. A long time ago, I set some pretty ambitious goals, and I overcame the obstacles that I needed to overcome to get here. I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to be evaluated in New York by the skills assessment team, and you know, of everybody that applied, I made the top 10 out of 2 countries, you know, so it's kind of hard for me to look back at it in a negative way. This show was a big part of the inspiration for the Settler's Wrench, and some other tools also that you guys hadn't seen yet that I look forward to being able to put out there. So regardless of the outcome, you know, I'm kind of now part of an extremely elite and fortunate group that got a chance to have this experience, and we got to have it together. So those are connections that I've made going forward. And of course, there were valuable lessons learned. I won't be without a backup Firesteel again. This Firesteel here, Keith Sears from the show made me on top. This one here I was kind of already working on. But, you know, see, so there's that. You know, I can speak from experience. Ask me how I know, because I do. One lesson I walk away with is the nice little neat bow drill kits that we all like to carry around. You know, they're good and dry. They've been burned in a half a dozen times already. Those are great for maybe teaching someone the fundamentals of friction fire, or maybe even some muscle memory. But for it to be realistic, you know, you kind of need to source those materials raw from wherever you are in a ton of different conditions and different regions. Anytime you're in a new region where there's some new timber to experiment with, you know, you need to do that. You know, do it when you're sick, do it when you're tired, do it when you're hungry, do it when you're cold, when you're wet, do it in the dark. And find those materials organically instead of carrying them with you, because that's likely when you're gonna need to make that fire. And like I say, doing it before you get to that point is always a good idea, because it an afterthought, you know, it just makes it that much more difficult. And it's pretty impractical for us to go all over the world and try all these different types of timbers and different types of climates and different types of, you know, health situations that we might be having. But what we can do is practice setting that experiment up efficiently, carving out your components that you need quickly and using as little energy as possible. Because when you get out there and you really need it, it's going to be experimental at best. So you need to be super efficient at doing that experiment. That way you can do it over and over and over and over if you need to. Video, I know this one's getting kind of long, but I did do a ton of stuff out there that they didn't show. I did find a ton of things out there they didn't show. I know they showed the little hot tub scene, and we'll talk about that a little more at a different time. For everybody that thinks I look ridiculously fat in there, you know, that's okay. I put on almost 40 pounds of rations to take with me. So that's what that was all about. But I'm okay with that. I did a lot of cool stuff out there, and you know, we'll check that out in a different video. And you know, the show's a long way from being over, and all the other castmates on there are very awesome people, so everybody stay tuned and keep watching them, and I'll even come back a little bit and talk on their situation. Some of them I know, some of them I don't, so it'll be interesting to me too going forward to see see kind of how everything plays out. And even ask them, you know, what they did with their Firesteel. I know, like, again, I know a couple of those, but I don't know everybody's situation. So if any of my castmates are watching this and want to chime in the comments, you know, how they procured their Firesteel, be pretty interesting to know. I'll see you guys next time.